Let's start with Donald Trump, Mike Pence. I have to start here. I actually, quite frankly, get tired of talking about Donald Trump and Mike Pence. I do. I honestly do. But I think history is going to look very poorly on not just them, but on America in general. Not just America. History is going to look down on democracy. Because if democracy is capable of giving us someone like Donald Trump, someone like Mike Pence, like all of these people, if democracy is capable of doing that and taking to the highest office people who belong in the dregs of society, then people are going to look at democracy and wonder if democracy is even worth it. And we take it for granted, one, that America is going to be here in perpetuity, and two, that democracy is going to be the standard form of government going forward in the future. That's not necessarily the case. It's very possible, and in fact, likely, that America won't be here in the distant future, but all the records of America will be here in digital format, and they will be able to look back through the lens of all the things that happened as a result of Donald Trump. They will be able to look back and see that America, and not just America, I have to get more specific, that democracy elected someone as ridiculous as Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. What did they do? Of course, by now you know the NFL protest and the protest of Mike Pence protesting the protest of systemic oppression. That's how absurd it is. He spent over $250,000. Mike Pence spent over $250,000 to go to a protest, to a football game, so that he could walk out of the football game. It doesn't stop there. He went there with the intention, at the demand of the president, saying that if you go and people take a knee, that you should walk out. So think about this. They spent taxpayer money and they went to protest the protest. Here are the president of the United States. In their oath, they're there to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. And we have a constitutional right to protest. And instead of just staying out of it, they behaved like children, making a scene because they wanted to continue to draw attention to people taking the knee. Why? Because it's politically expedient for them. This is good politics for them. This is what their base wants. This is what their base needs and loves and thrives on. So they know that it's good politics for them. And they also know that what they are doing is undermining their oath of office, and it's undermining the Constitution in general. Not only their oath to protect and defend the Constitution, but the Constitution in general. And here we are. I mean, seriously, here we are with two of the most childish elected officials probably in the country, holding the highest offices in the country, whereas we have real problems to deal with. And maybe if I take a pause and say, well, okay, Donald Trump is really going to F up other issues. He's totally going to get us into a war with North Korea. Maybe it's in our best interest that he is involved in these childish things to keep him preoccupied. The problem with that assessment is that his job will never be fully preoccupied, because when the shit hits the fan with North Korea, they are going to bring him military decisions for him to decide. And what he has spent time thinking on and dwelling on, is putting his energy on, is going to be a distraction to him. People like to say, oh, this is just a distraction. This is just a distraction. Well, it's a distraction for Donald Trump first and foremost. He should be running the goddamn country. But he's not. And so here's the other thing with these dudes. And I talked about it earlier on Content News. And I think it's I don't know. I have a hard time. I'm an institutionalist. The more it's not necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying it is it's a good thing. I'm still kind of weighing this out. I'm still learning myself. I am an institutionalist that likes stability. And the more I realize that about myself, the more I see how I cut myself off to not be as disrespectful to the office of the presidency as I would be if I wasn't an institutionalist, if I didn't have a modicum of respect for the structures of the United States. And I have a respect for the structures, not in the sense that they're noble and good. I have respect for the structures because they're the structures that we have to operate in this system, right? So that's the source of my hesitation on saying everything that I would say to people as ridiculous as Donald Trump and Mike Pence. Seriously, think about this. Would you hire Donald Trump and Mike Pence to cut your grass? And they carry themselves in the manner in which they carry themselves. You wouldn't hire them there. Matter of fact, my friend, I don't know his Twitter handle better. I know his name. That's a goddamn shame. Slugger Gels, Andrew Jones. He's a freelance reporter and journalist, and he works with YouTube. He said on Twitter, that it is a shame that Donald Trump, that Jemele Hill from ESPN is being held to a higher standard on social media than the president of the United States. Right. And so you can see just how ridiculous and out of parity this thing is. This thing is out of whack to the point where we have a president who is the biggest child in the room. He's the biggest child in the room. You have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, the president and the vice president, and they are literally engaging in undermining their oath to the Constitution, to protect and defend the Constitution by protesting people who are protesting. It's the height of absurdity. And so what it has done, this is why it's not a distraction. And I get when people say that, oh, he just wants you to talk about this. Well, here's the power of the presidency. While it may be a distraction by Donald Trump, even though I'm fully capable of addressing every other issue that he's maybe trying to deflect from. And we could talk about North Korea. We could talk about tax reform. We could talk about healthcare, anything and everything that he wants to talk about or he wants to distract from. We're fully capable of multitasking. But while some people call this a distraction, the reality of it is that high schools across the country, businesses across the country are taking punitive actions against people who are not acquiescing to the demands of the president. He's making this an issue that are causing students to be expelled, causing students to be suspended. Football players are having to sign contracts saying that they are giving up their constitutional right to protest in exchange for the ability to play football for the school district. Right. And then we see now that the effects of this are being felt by Jemele Hill on ESPN. And not just her, I'm sure other people, but particularly her because she's on the national stage. She has now been suspended from ESPN. And the root of it is this entire acrimonious environment that the president of the United States has created. That's the root of it. And the fact of the matter is if we continue to let this go unchallenged, if we continue to let this go, then the president of the United States is going to create an environment where the default position is do whatever he says or you lose your job. That's exactly what we're faced with. We're faced with that situation. If you don't do what the president says and what he thinks is right, this is not something that you would expect from a president and a vice president. This is something that you 100% would expect from a dictator. Absolutely would expect this type of behavior from a dictator.